Is it truly bad to be a loser? The term loser is tossed around as though it were the ultimate insult, a label that disqualifies someone from the human race, condemning them to the sidelines of society. But what if the very thing we are taught to fear is not so bad after all? What if the concept of being a loser is a misinterpretation, a skewed reflection of what really matters in life? In the quiet moments of our lives, away from the noise of ambition and competition, we often find the most truth. Imagine the last time you sat in stillness, when you weren't doing anything. No tasks, no expectations, just being. That moment of peace often feels foreign in a world obsessed with hustle, with moving forward, with winning. But Taoist philosophy, with its roots deeply embedded in nature and simplicity, suggests that perhaps we're all missing something. Take a moment to consider the life of someone who rejects the world's measuring stick for success. A person who chooses a simple life, free from the relentless pressure to achieve, to grow, to become more. In the eyes of many, they would be considered a loser. But what if they were actually the wisest of us all? Ancient philosophers raised questions about wealth and reputation, those two cornerstones of success in the modern world. They argued that pursuing them isn't inherently bad, but it's also not the answer to happiness. Imagine you spend your life chasing wealth, trying to acquire things, bigger houses, faster cars, nicer clothes, but for what? To show off? To feel superior? What happens when those things inevitably fade away or no longer satisfy? This pursuit often leads to burnout, to stress, to a sense of never quite feeling enough. And in trying to secure ourselves in this pursuit, we often lose sight of the things that matter most: joy, connection, peace. Today, in the midst of what some call a hustle culture, we've turned ambition into a religion. Everyone is expected to be driven, to push through the struggles and sacrifices, all in the name of success. Social media floods us with examples of people showing off their achievements, their wealth, their beauty, constant reminders that if you're not winning, you're somehow failing. But are they truly winning? And is that kind of success even worth having? Can it really bring lasting happiness? There's a quiet truth in stepping away from the race, in slowing down and acknowledging that there is more to life than accumulation. What if losing meant freedom? What if giving up on the idea of winning actually brought us closer to fulfillment? We live in a world where we often define ourselves by what we do, what we achieve, and how much we have. Good is synonymous with successful, and bad is reserved for the person who fails to meet those standards. But who decided this? Who made this the definition of what's right and wrong? And more importantly, what does it do to our minds when we constantly chase something just out of reach, always feeling like we're not quite enough? Consider the Taoist story of two friends, one wealthy and successful, the other poor and insignificant. The rich man brags about his success, claiming that he's somehow more virtuous, more worthy because of his wealth. The sage, however, gently corrects him, explaining that success does not equate to worth. Luck, circumstance, and timing all play a role, things that we don't have control over. What if we simply aren't given the same opportunities as others? Does that make us less valuable? So the next time someone calls you a loser for not chasing the conventional dream, remember this. Maybe it's not losing at all. Maybe it's a quiet, peaceful victory, a victory that no one else can see but you. And in the end, isn't that what matters most? Take a moment and consider the things you're chasing right now. A better job, more followers on social media, a bigger house, or maybe the perfect body. What if these pursuits, while they may seem essential, are actually distractions? Distractions from the deeper, quieter needs within you, the need for peace, for simplicity, for connection. We live in a culture that celebrates busyness. It's like a badge of honor to say, "I'm always working, I'm always on the go." But in doing so, we forget that rest is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Just like plants need time to grow in the soil, we need time to rest, to reflect, to recharge. There's a saying that if you keep your hands busy, you'll never have to face your thoughts. But what if we stopped filling every moment with tasks? What if we allowed our minds to wander, to be still, to feel? We often fear the silence because in it we confront ourselves. But that's where the magic lies. The more we try to escape from stillness, the further we drift from understanding who we truly are. The old wisdom of Taoism teaches us the value of surrender. Not the surrender of giving up, but the surrender of letting go. It's the kind of letting go where you trust that the universe is already unfolding as it should. You don't need to force it. It's like watching a flower bloom. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to push it. You simply witness it in awe of its natural beauty. Life, too, blooms in its own time. The more we try to rush it, the more we miss. Imagine that instead of living life like a race, we treated it like a dance. Not a dance where we're constantly trying to impress others or hit every beat perfectly, but a dance where we simply flow with the music. There are no wrong steps. Every movement is part of the rhythm. And sometimes the beauty of the dance comes from the pauses, from the moments when you stop moving, just to feel the music in your bones. But in today's world, we don't let ourselves pause. There's always something to do, something to achieve, something to prove. We're told that we have to be everything: perfect partner, successful career person, health guru, philanthropist, and of course, a social media star. The pressure to be perfect in every area of life is overwhelming, and we end up chasing perfection instead of peace. But what if we stopped trying to be perfect? What if we simply embraced being human, imperfect, flawed, yet beautiful in our own unique way? The paradox of our time is that we have more than ever, yet we feel emptier than ever. We have more choices, more technology, more opportunities, but the price we pay is exhaustion. And the saddest part is, we often don't realize how much we're missing until it's too late. We spend our youth building careers, our middle years maintaining status, and our later years trying to recover what we lost in the chase. But what if we realized that the whole time we had what we needed right in front of us? What if we had stopped to see the small joys, the fleeting moments of connection, the quiet moments of peace? Picture this. You're sitting quietly, but in your mind there's a constant hum, a chatter, a voice that's always present. It's not really saying anything new, is it? Just the same old thoughts over and over. Thoughts about what you should be doing, about how you should be living, about the way the world sees you. That voice isn't just making noise for the sake of it, it's trying to convince you of something important. But the strange part is this: when you get the things it wants, whether it's a promotion, a relationship, or even just a new possession, it doesn't give you peace, not for long. Sure, there's a brief sense of satisfaction, a fleeting feeling of accomplishment, but then it comes again, doesn't it? The voice, the desire, the hunger for more, always more. What if this voice, this false self, isn't just some harmless byproduct of our minds? What if it's the very thing keeping us trapped in suffering, in chaos, in a never-ending cycle of desire? What if the real enemy, the one we're all trying to escape, the one that causes pain, confusion, and separation, isn't something out there, but something within? What if, in truth, the real devil isn't an external force we need to defeat, but a creation of our own minds? What if the very thing that holds us back, that keeps us stuck in cycles of fear and longing, is a product of our own belief in the illusion of self? This false identity we've built up over time. It's not that the ego is some malicious force actively trying to ruin us. No, it's much subtler than that. The ego is like a well-intentioned but misguided friend. It wants to protect us, but it does so by creating separation, by convincing us that we're not part of the whole, that we're different. that we need to constantly fight to survive. It keeps us isolated in our own little world, convinced that we need to compete, to be better, to prove our worth. But the truth is, this constant struggle only keeps us blind to what we really are. It keeps us chasing things that will never satisfy, all the while convincing us that they are the answer. The Bible gives us an interesting perspective on this. In the story of the Garden of Eden, the serpent, often interpreted as a symbol of temptation or evil, whispers to Eve, suggesting that if she eats the forbidden fruit, she will become like God, knowing good and evil. This isn't just a tale of disobedience, it's a story about desire. The serpent embodies the voice of the ego, convincing Eve that she is incomplete, that she must have something more in order to be whole. This voice separates her from her true nature, just as the ego separates us from the present moment and from our deepest truth. Similarly, in the Buddhist tradition, the ego is seen as the source of all suffering. The Buddha taught that our attachment to our desires, the very things the ego constantly craves, keeps us trapped in the cycle of samsara, or rebirth. The ego tells us that we must always be seeking something outside of ourselves to feel fulfilled. But true liberation comes from recognizing that the source of our suffering is not external. It's the attachment to the self, to the I, that the ego convinces us is real. By letting go of this false self, we can break free from suffering. In a more scientific context, consider what modern psychology tells us about the ego. The ego, according to Freud, is the part of the psyche that mediates between our primal desires, the ID, and the moralistic constraints of society, the superego. While Freud's theory is far from perfect, it does suggest something profound. The ego is a mediator, a negotiator, constantly balancing competing forces. But what happens when the ego takes over? When it loses its ability to mediate and instead asserts control over our identity, we become trapped in a cycle of self-centeredness, fear, and desire. We lose sight of our true selves in the noise of the ego's constant demands. Take, for example, the ancient Greek myth of Narcissus. Narcissus was a young man who became so obsessed with his own reflection that he lost sight of everything else, even his own life. This myth symbolizes the dangers of egoic self-obsession, the inability to see beyond one's own desires and image. Narcissus's tragic end, dying staring at his reflection, can be seen as a metaphor for the consequences of living only to feed the ego, unable to break free from the illusion of the self. In the teachings of Socrates, we find something similar. He warned that a person who is not self-aware, who cannot see past their own ego, is living in ignorance. To him, knowing oneself was the highest form of wisdom. It was a way of breaking free from the constraints of the ego and reconnecting with something much larger than oneself. And even in the words of the famous mystic Rumi, we hear the same idea. Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in new form. This reflects the understanding that the ego, while a necessary part of our human experience, is not the source of our true identity. By letting go of the ego's control, we can access something much more expansive, something not bound by the limitations of time or form.